Hello everyone, welcome back to Coach Greg Sports. Today we're going to be doing the Week 3 waiver wire section. So I'm going to be talking about players that are not very owned in ESPN and Yahoo leagues, generally under 50% in both. Sometimes if there's a player that I think is worth rostering it that's under 50% in one of them, I will mention them as well. But without further ado, we'll get started. I'll talk about quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, and defenses to pick up for this week. So first off, I got Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow is coming off the best game of his career. He was 37 out of 61, 316 passing yards, 3 touchdowns against the Browns. He plays against Philadelphia this week, who did give up a lot of points to Jared Goff and the Rams. So it's an okay matchup, but it's probably not one I want to start Joe Burrow in. But if you're able to stash him on your bench as like a second quarterback, if you have room to do that, especially if your team has a bunch of injuries and you don't need to fill in for those injuries, he's definitely a guy to look out for, especially in the weeks to come. Last week, he had over 30 fantasy points. This is with 6 points per passing touchdown. He's owned in about 45% of ESPN leagues, 71% of Yahoo leagues. So just check your league, see if he's out there, if you need just kind of another option at quarterback that you can stash and start in decent matchups. Next up is Ryan Tannehill. He completed 18 out of 24 passes, 239 yards, 4 touchdowns, 12 rushing yards, ended up with 34.76 fantasy points last week. He's only owned in about 35% of ESPN leagues and 46% of Yahoo leagues, so there's a good chance he's out there. Titans are going up against the Vikings this weekend, and the Vikings defense has been very poor, so Ryan Tannehill is a good streaming option this week. So if he's out there in your league, you need a quarterback, go out there, grab him. He should put up pretty good points for you once again this week. Next up is Derek Carr. Derek Carr, we all saw him on Monday Night Football, 28 out of 38, 282 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, chipped in with 3 rushing yards, 27.58 fantasy points. And as you guys see here, he's available in pretty much most ESPN and Yahoo leagues. He's not a guy you probably want to start this week, but he's definitely somebody to consider going forward in the future. He goes up against the Patriots this week, so it's probably not the best matchup, even though Russell Wilson was pretty effective against them. Next up, we got Gardner Minshew. Gardner Minshew is 30 out of 45 this past weekend, 339 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. This is the second week of over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. Chipped in with 19 rushing yards again, so kind of expect that to be his number for rushing yards wise, 29.46 fantasy points. He's still available in pretty much most ESPN and Yahoo leagues. If you need a guy that has a pretty easy schedule most of the way for the season, and maybe you had a quarterback like Drew Brees or Tom Brady and you're not happy with him, it could be a time to pivot to Gardner Minshew. He does go up against Miami this week, so it should be a pretty good matchup as well. Last but not least for quarterbacks on this list is Justin Herbert, who made his first career start this past weekend against Kansas City. He was 22 out of 33, 311 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception passing-wise, 18 rushing yards with 1 touchdown on the ground, 24.24 fantasy points. He's available in pretty much every ESPN and Yahoo league. So if you need a guy that you kind of just want to stash, see how he does throughout the season, he could be a decent option. Tyrod Taylor did leave before the game with a chest problem. I would expect Herbert to start this week. They actually go up against Carolina this week, so if you really want to stream him, you could. I probably won't recommend it in his second career start, but Carolina's defense is not very good at all. Next up, we got Mike Davis. So Mike Davis was the backup to Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey injured his ankle this past weekend. Christian McCaffrey is expected to miss between 4 and 6 weeks at this point. He played after McCaffrey came out of the game, so he only had 1 carry for 1 yard. He had 8 receptions on his 8 targets for 74 yards. That's a very positive sign for him, especially since he's not really known as a pass-catching back. He ended up with 15.5 fantasy points. He's probably going to be one of the most added players this week, especially if you're a Christian McCaffrey owner. You see he's owned in less than 1% of ESPN leagues and 7% of Yahoo leagues. So there's a good chance he's out there. If you own Christian McCaffrey, you're probably going to want to go after him. If you don't own Christian McCaffrey and you need a running back, he's a great choice as well. The only bad thing is that they go against the Chargers defense this week, who's been very good against the run, so I wouldn't expect too much from him in Game 1. Next up, Joshua Kelley. Chargers running back, we need to talk a lot about him. He's still criminally undervalued here, about 28% of ESPN leagues and 40% of Yahoo leagues. Against the Chiefs, he played on 52% of his snaps. He ended up with 23 carries for 64 yards, not the greatest yards per carry. And he got 3 targets. He caught 2 of them for 49 yards. So he is a capable receiver out of the backfield. He ended up with 13.3 fantasy points. And why this guy is a must-own this week. Because he's going against the Carolina Panthers defense, who is terrible against the running game. As you see, him and Eckler split up the snaps. Even if he's out there, if he gets 20 carries against this Panthers team, he is a must-start. And so you need to pick him up this week for your team, especially if you're a team that lost Barkley or Raheem Mostert or Christian McCaffrey and you need a running back, or if you're a team that wins 0 running back and it hasn't panned out for you, Joshua Kelley is a guy to roster and start this week. Next up, we got Wayne Gallman and Dion Lewis. Saquon Barkley, obviously, he tore his ACL, is out for the year. These two guys haven't done too much this year, so I'm not really going to talk about what they have done. But in ESPN leagues, Dion Lewis is owned in about 1% in 6% in Yahoo leagues. Wayne Gallman's 1% or less in both formats. I would expect Gallman to get a lot of the early down work and Dion Lewis to be more of the pass catching back. I'm not really going after either of these two this week. If you lost Barkley, you're probably going to want to pick up a different running back. There is the news Devonta Freeman is coming in for a workout on Tuesday with the Giants. I really don't expect them to sign him because he wants too much money. And the Giants pretty much have a lost season as it is anyways, especially with Barkley out. And they haven't been playing too good anyways. So there's not really a point of them giving $4 million to Devonta Freeman just to play running back on a bad team. Next up, we got Jerrick McKinnon. So Raheem Mostert and Tevin Coleman both are hurt. Mostert should miss a couple weeks with a sprained MCL in his knee. Coleman also has a knee injury. We haven't heard too much about it yet. This past weekend, McKinnon had 3 carries for 77 yards, 1 long carry. Yeah, he scored a touchdown on that as well. I forgot to put the 1 touchdown behind there. 13.7 fantasy points. He's owned in about 19% of ESPN leagues and 25% of Yahoo leagues, so there's a good chance he's out there. If you're in a PPR format, he's a great option there. He's a good pass-catching back as well. And then last but not least, I have Jeff Wilson Jr. Could be a sleeper. Jeff Wilson Jr. is somebody I love a lot. I honestly believe if he ever got the chance to be full-time or even a half-time back in San Francisco, he would put up numbers. So if you're in one of these leagues, McKinnon's owned, maybe some of these other guys are owned, Wilson Jr. could be a good pickup. They go against the Giants this week, who have not been good against the run. So both these guys are viable flex options if you need them, especially if Tevin Coleman misses as well. Next up is Darrell Henderson. He's probably the guy I would target the most on this list at running back. So both Cam Akers and Malcolm Brown are dealing with injuries. Cam Akers had a rib injury. They said it's a rib cartilage injury. So I would expect him to be out a couple weeks. Malcolm Brown broke, I believe it was his pinky finger and had surgery on it now. So that's probably going to make it harder for him to carry the ball. I'm not sure if he's going to miss time or not, but it's definitely going to affect him. But in this game, Henderson had 15 carries for 87 yards, 1 touchdown. Saw 3 targets, had 2 receptions for 40 yards. So this was a great day for fantasy for him. And let's see, he's owned in about 45% of ESPN leagues, 33% of Yahoo leagues. So if he's out there, you definitely want to go after him. And then we have to talk about Myles Gaskin again this week. He played on 65% of the snaps. Last week it was 63% of the snaps. So he's not going away at this point. Saw 7 carries for 46 yards, 7 targets, 6 receptions for 36 yards. So what should we make out of this? So he ended up with 82 total yards. He's not a guy that's probably going to go get a touchdown or anything like that. He's very efficient on what he's been doing. Ended up with 14.2 fantasy points. If you need a guy like to kind of stream as a flex or something like that, or if you just want to stash him on the end of your bench, feel free to do so. He's owned in about 13% of ESPN leagues, 16% of Yahoo leagues. He's definitely somebody to monitor going forward. Next up, we got Curtis Samuel. The wide receivers are, like I said in my video last week, none of this is in a specific order. Curtis Samuel is somebody to look out for, especially with Christian McCaffrey hurt. Played on 70% of snaps week 2. Was a little bit lower than his week 1 snap rate. He had 4 carries for 26 yards. And then he caught both his targets for 13 yards. He ended up with just under 6 fantasy points. Not a lot, I know. But with Christian McCaffrey being out now, they could try to work him into the offense a little bit more on some of the underneath routes. He's owned in about 42% of ESPN leagues, 27% of Yahoo leagues. He's more of a stash guy than anything, especially when Christian McCaffrey is out. Laviska Shenault played on 57% of snaps. I believe it was 5% less than last week. The thing that I did like is they used him 5 times carrying the ball for 37 yards. Still only saw 4 targets, caught 3 of them for 35 yards. Pretty similar to his week 1 numbers receiving game. 10.2 fantasy points. ESPN is owned in about 18% of leagues, 17% of leagues in Yahoo. He's somebody to pick up and kind of stash on the back end of your bench and see how he does throughout the season. Keep in mind, D.D. Westbrook is still been inactive, so if he comes back, we'll have to see how that affects everything with Jacksonville. Next guy we got up is Keelan Cole, another Jacksonville wide receiver. He played on 68% of snaps, I believe is 2% more than the previous week. He saw 7 targets, caught 6 of them for 58 yards and a touchdown. He's shown very good chemistry with Gardner Minshew, and he ended up with 17.8 fantasy points. He's available in pretty much most ESPN and Yahoo leagues still. If you need a guy to plug and play against Miami, he could be all right, especially if Byron Jones doesn't play. Xavier Howard would obviously guard DJ Chark, and then that would leave inferior coverage for Keelan Cole and Laviska Shenault. Mecole Hardman, somebody we have to talk about. He hasn't been too impressive so far this year. He played on 62% of the snaps this past week. Big bump up over the previous week, but Sammy Watkins did leave the game with a concussion. He saw 1 carry for 3 yards, 3 targets, caught 2 of them for 30 yards. I believe he ended with 7.3 fantasy points. He's still owned in a lot of leagues, but he's definitely somebody you want to pick up and just see how he plays out over the year if you have a space. Tre'Quan Smith, with Michael Thomas out, he was a guy I expected to step up. I know a lot of people were talking about Emmanuel Sanders. I've been on the record as saying do not start Emmanuel Sanders. Emmanuel Sanders did nothing last night. Tre'Quan Smith played 10% more of the snaps than him. He played on 88% of the snaps, saw more targets. He had 7 targets, 5 receptions for 86 yards, 13.6 fantasy points. He had a pretty good game. He's somebody you could probably start in PPR and he's not going to hurt you. But he's owned in about 24% of ESPN leagues and 15% of Yahoo leagues, so there's a good chance he's available out in your league. Next up is Allen Lazard. He saw 84% of the snaps, pretty similar to week 1. Saw 5 targets, caught 3 of them for 45 yards, 7.5 fantasy points. He's probably owned in about half leagues right now, so it's kind of 50-50 if he's out there. If you're a guy that has Devontae Adams, he's definitely worth picking up in case Adams misses time with his hamstring injury now. Bryan Edwards, like I've been saying, he's somebody I love. He played on 61% of snaps, so it was a little bit lower than week 1, but he still was tied for the lead of all wide receivers on snap rate percentage. He saw 2 targets, caught both of them for 42 yards. Looked pretty good out there. Ended with 6.2 fantasy points. So he's not seeing a lot of targets. He's catching the targets he does get. I think they're going to get him more involved throughout the year. A lot of teams have probably been dropping him. That's why you see these percentages that you have. But if you want to stash him, he's definitely worth stashing. This could be a case of like A.J. Brown last year, where A.J. Brown just wasn't getting targets early in the year, and then he flashes later in the year. But on the other hand, Edwards has been playing way more than Brown played early last year. Michael Pittman Jr. is somebody we do have to talk about. Paris Campbell did leave the game with a knee injury. He's going to be out for a while. I believe Michael Pittman Jr. played on 91 or 92% of snaps this week, saw 6 targets, caught 4 of them for 37 yards, and it was 7.7 fantasy points. He's owned in about 15 to 70% of leagues based on ESPN and Yahoo. He's definitely somebody you want to stash on the end of your bench. You just kind of want to wait and see how it plays out with him, especially going into this week. T.Y. Hilton has not been impressive at all. Pittman Jr. and Alie-Cox were pretty much their best 2 wide receivers this week. Corey Davis is somebody we still have to talk about a little bit. He's creeping up closer to 50% in both ESPN and Yahoo. He played 81% of snaps again. Saw 5 targets, 3 receptions, 36 yards, 1 touchdown, 12.6 fantasy points. A pretty good overall day. Ryan Tannehill was very efficient, so they didn't have to target him too much. He's definitely somebody to watch going forward. And he does go against that Vikings matchup next week, which could be very beneficial for him. Next up, we got Russell Gage. Russell Gage is pretty much a must-add now, especially if you need a wide receiver, especially if you're playing in PPR format. He played on 83% of the snaps this week after 70% week 1, so he's going to be out there a ton. Their defense isn't very good, so they're going to be throwing the ball a lot. He saw 9 targets, caught 6 of them, 46 yards, 1 touchdown, 16.6 fantasy points. He also threw a pass to Julio Jones that should have been caught for a touchdown, which would have boosted his stats even a little bit more. Owned in ESPN about 28% in the leagues, 23% Yahoo. This should be closer to 50%, and I would expect it to be more so next week. Now we're moving over to tight ends. So the next one we got up is Dalton Schultz for the Cowboys. He played on about 70% of the snaps. He ended up with 10 targets, 9 receptions for 88 yards, 1 touchdown. So this was a very good week for him, 21.8 fantasy points. I know I kind of knocked him. I didn't think he was going to be very good coming off that Monday night performance. But if you do need a tight end, he's somebody to definitely pick up, and we'll see how he does the rest of the year. Owned in about 2% of leagues overall. Logan Thomas, he didn't have a great week, but he's still kind of under-owned. He played on 91% of snaps. He did see 9 targets, so he's getting the targets. He caught 4 receptions for 26 yards. He might be somebody that's a little bit more touchdown reliant, but it's hard to find tight ends that are getting a good target share, and he's getting that. He's the number 2 in Washington, clearly behind Terry McLaurin. So he's definitely worth rostering, putting on the end of your bench, playing as a tight end in favorable matchups. Next up's Drew Sample. He played on 59% of snaps this week. He played on most snaps after CJ Uzomah got hurt, and he's going to be out for the year, so that helps Samples out a lot. Saw 9 targets, caught 7 of them for 45 yards, ended up with 11.5 fantasy points. He's owned in pretty much 1% or less than that of leagues. So he's definitely out there. He's definitely a guy you can play in a favorable matchup, put on the end of your bench. Keep an eye out for going forward. Last but not least, at tight end, I believe, we got Alie-Cox, 67% of snaps with Jack Doyle out. He's somebody that a lot of people in the community have liked for a while. He's a big guy. He's been more of a red zone threat than anything. But in this game, he actually showed us that he was more than just that. He had 6 targets for 5 receptions for 111 yards. So he's getting over 20 yards of reception. So that's really good for somebody that's no more as a red zone threat. 16.1 fantasy points. He's owned in pretty much 1% of leagues, so there's a good chance he's out there. If Jack Doyle misses, he's definitely somebody to look out for. If Doyle plays, then it hurts his value a lot. And then last but not least, we got defenses to consider for week 2. Tampa Bay's defense, I talked about them last week. They're somebody I like a lot. They're owned in about 50% of leagues. They have another good matchup this week against Denver. Denver's going to be without Drew Lock. Jeff Driscoll's going to come in and start. They could be without Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy as well. So that's a really banged up team, and Tampa's defense is good as it is already. So for me, they're a must start. If you're streaming defenses, pick them up. If they're available in your league, I'd probably pick them up unless you have a clear, better option. Then we got the Chargers defense against the Panthers. I kind of talked about this matchup a lot already. Chargers defense is very good. Panthers are banged up now with missing Christian McCaffrey. Teddy Bridgewater has not looked great so far this year. Could be a very good matchup for them. And last but not least, we have Cleveland. They're going against Washington. And Washington hasn't been too good. Dwayne Haskins isn't very good. Cleveland's defense played decent against Cincinnati. And they're pretty talented overall. We'll see if they get Greedy Williams back this week. But Denzel Ward on Terry McLaurin will definitely help them out. Logan Thomas could have a decent game against the Cleveland linebackers, who are less than stellar. But overall, those are the 3 defenses I'm considering this week if I'm looking to pick one up. Most of the leagues I'm in, I already picked up Tampa's defense, so I'm just going out and playing them until further notice because I think they're going to be a great defense. And this is pretty much it for the waiver wires for this week. These are the guys that I do like, I would consider picking up. A lot of this depends on your league size, your roster construction. So these are just some names for you guys to consider. Obviously, the final say comes down to you. If you have any questions about waiver wire pickups, questions about your roster, who should I drop to pick up somebody on waivers, if you want any advice like that, feel free to leave it down in the comments, ask questions. I will respond to each and every one of you. But with that being said, if you guys liked and enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. It helps build the community that we are trying to build here at Coach Craig Sports. If you're a newer current subscriber who hasn't already done so, please hit that notification bell as well. It'll let you know every single time I post up a video. Like I've been saying this week, Monday we got the top performers, Tuesday's waiver wire, Wednesday is previewing the Thursday night matchup and doing start sits for that. Then Thursday is DFS show, and Friday we preview all the other matchups. Saturday, if we get somebody else on the channel, I'll make a video with them. And then Sunday we got the live stream, obviously, before the games start. I hope you guys all enjoyed these videos that I'm putting out. Hopefully all this content is helpful to you in your leagues. And like I said, feel free to reach out to me, whether it's in the comment section or whether it's at my email at coachcraigsports@gmail.com, on the Coach Craig Sports Facebook page, or on Twitter at Coach Craig Sport. But with that being said, that's pretty much all I got for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed, and have a great rest of your day.